Last Thursday on September the 8th, 2022, Queen Elizabeth II, the longest reigning monarch in British history, died at the age of 96. So I thought it was appropriate to take time on Don't Talk TV to have an episode talking about my views on Her Majesty and her legacy, and just a very little bit about what legally will happen going forward. Hello, my name is Nicholas Wansbutter. I'm a lawyer in Stratford, Ontario, Canada, and welcome to Don't Talk TV. So, as all of my viewers know, as the news was all over the place, the head of state of Canada, Queen Elizabeth II, died after almost 70 years of reigning. She was the queen for my entire lifetime. She was the queen for my parents' entire lifetime. So it's certainly the end of an era, and it's something that I wanted to talk about a little bit. I will not tolerate a lot of the garbage that I've seen people saying from both the left and the right, disgracing her memory and saying some really wrong things, and I'm not going to get into an argument about that. But if you want to hear what I think about our recently deceased queen, you can watch this episode, and you can have your debates and call her vile names elsewhere. Now, all that said, I have said on this show a number of times that I am in principle a monarchist. I'm ardently a monarchist, and I am not a supporter of democracy as a form of government. I frankly think that democracy is one of the worst forms of government possible. That said, although I think Queen Elizabeth II was very dignified, she had unparalleled work ethic, and she did a lot of good as a figurehead, she was, in fact, one of the worst monarchs in British history. I would put Elizabeth I as the worst, but Queen Elizabeth II was, with all due respect, probably the second worst monarch, certainly the second worst queen in the history of the British Empire and of England. Now, that said, I would still say she was better than any president. I can't think of any president or prime minister who was better than her. That's not saying anything too great about her tenure. It's just saying how bad our democratic leaders are. And I include Donald Trump in that. I suspect that a number of my viewers are big Trump supporters, and they would be retorting, well, what about Trump? Well, I've got three words about what about Trump. Operation Warp Speed. We're where we are when it comes to vaccine mandates and people being forced to take these jabs primarily because of Donald Trump, who was the most powerful man in the world during 2020 as the President of the United States, and who not only did nothing to stop the COVID-19 tyranny that we've seen, he also fast-tracked the miracle vaccines that are now being forced upon people. And the reason I think that, I don't think that monarchy is perfect, no form of government is perfect. I guess I would go with Winston Churchill's commentary, only instead of saying that all the other forms of government other than democracy are worse, I would say all the other forms of government other than monarchy are worse. With a hereditary monarchy, you at least have the occasional chance of having a good leader. And it has happened many, many times over the past several thousand years when monarchies were the predominant form of government. When you have a democracy, you never have a good ruler, because you have individuals who sell their country out so that they can get elected, so they can get their 4 years, so they can get their next 4 years, so they can get their pension. It's always very self-serving, and it appeals to some of the worst sentiments in humanity. And the ancient Greeks realized this. They said democracy only works until people realize they can vote themselves a share of other people's money. That's why democracy always follows the same trend that we're seeing now, of decadence and decay into socialism, and then ultimately things start falling apart, because when you're taking people's money to give it to other people, and especially special interest groups, eventually things start breaking down. So that said, let me speak a little bit more about Queen Elizabeth II and why I say she was the second worst queen in the history of England and the British Empire and the Commonwealth. She was crowned queen in 1953, so at that time the British Empire was still a worldwide empire. Edmund Hillary had just summited Mount Everest, the first person to do so. It was still a vibrant, powerful empire, and now, I think Tucker Carlson put it very well when he said that Britain is now a regional banking center / refugee camp. And Her Majesty oversaw that transformation. Now, she isn't entirely to blame. She's a constitutional monarch, not an absolute monarch. And as I said, she's a figurehead. Now, although that said, she still bears a responsibility because as a figurehead, she still had a certain amount of influence. And in law, she did still have the power to refuse to rubber stamp all the laws that came across her desk. However, she never did that. She always rubber stamped everything that came to her for a variety of reasons that we won't have time to get into. But suffice to say, her responsibility is somewhat diminished. But at the end of the day, she left her nation in a much worse state than when she was first crowned. And she certainly left her church, which, keep in mind, she is the head of the Church of England as well. And she left that in a much worse situation than when she was first crowned. Ironically, the reason the left despises her and why they're attacking her and hoping that she died in agony is because of that British Empire that ceased to exist during her reign. They still associate her with that empire, and therefore they hate her. But I say it's ironic because she oversaw the complete downfall and destruction of that empire. And it's also ironic because, as far as empires go, the British Empire was one of the more benign and humane empires. I guarantee you that people in Africa, if they aren't already, will soon be pining for the British Empire now that China is basically taking over that continent. But again, as a figurehead, she did an excellent job. She was always very dignified. I mean, she was in the public spotlight pretty much 24/7 for 70 years and maintained her dignity. And I think very few of us would have been able to do that. She was a very good representative of what was good of the British Empire and what was good of Canada. And her passing makes me sad because it's the end of an era. It's yet another piece of the Canada that is gone and will never get back. Because she does still represent Canada as it was when it was much better. Many of Canada's best years were under her reign. And the monarchy probably doesn't have long to live. I don't see King Charles III being as good of an ambassador of the monarchy. And certainly King Charles has some very strange views, some very leftist views that are highly concerning. But on that topic, let me just very briefly speak about legally. Some people have asked me, so what happens now? Does he automatically become king? Yes. As soon as Queen Elizabeth II died, King Charles III became the King of Canada and the King of Britain and the rest of the Commonwealth countries that haven't become republics. The various courts of Queen's Bench immediately became the courts of the King's Bench. All of the criminal proceedings I deal with have always been titled Her Majesty the Queen and such, or the shortened version of the RV, R for Regina. Well, now it's His Majesty the King and John Smith, and the R will now stand for Rex. Now, there will be a formal coronation eventually, but the coronation itself doesn't make him king or not the king. He is the king, and we do have a king now, so God save the king. Now, this video is not legal advice. If you need legal advice, please call a lawyer. You can call another lawyer or myself. My phone number and website are listed below. If there's show topics you'd like to see me cover, please send an email to the email address listed below or leave a comment in the comment section. And if you found this video at all interesting, helpful, or informative, please consider liking, sharing, and subscribing and following us on social media.